You're back live with us tonight on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. South Africa has barely emerged from state capture, bringing a whole new understanding of the profound impact of corruption on social and economic development. There has been several breakthroughs with several high-profile cases against prominent individuals before the courts. The country's Public Service Commission says it is working hard to build an efficient, ethical and capable public service. Joining us now for an update on the goals of a corruption-free public service ahead of International Anti-Corruption Day this week is Public Service Commission chairperson, Professor Somadoda Fikeni. Prof, good evening and thank you very much for your time tonight here on In Focus. Many are seeing what they call green shoots of heading in the right direction in terms, for example, of the many cases that the NPA is now pursuing coming out of the state capture inquiry, but also some of the work that the SIU has been doing, some of the work that the public protector would have been doing as well, and saying we are heading in the right direction. But how do we know if we are heading in the right direction? Have we done a diagnostic analysis to determine the scope and the extent of the problem that we were dealing with? And have we taken a look at a review of our historic and existing interventions, if they work and whether or not they need to be improved? Good evening.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to present on this very important subject. I do think that many reports which culminate with the Zondo Commission report on state capture, which is a culmination of almost a dozen or so reports into some of corruptions that is found in the public sector. Sometimes it involves the private sector. They have given us a proper diagnosis of the nature of the problem and the scale of the problem. Remember, even the Zondo Commission report didn't take the full universe. It was merely taking a sample of some of the departments. And some of the reports, whether it's your Newzroom report into SARS, several reports on PRASA and several others, all what we would say we now know in the main, the nature of the beast. And it is for that reason that we should not wait until you have 40 other commissions or 40 reports. We ought to say, now that we know, let's mobilize every other structure, every other agent, NGO, government, business sector to fight the scourge of corruption, because it is threatening to reverse the very gains that were made in the initial stages of our transition to democracy. And the net losers here are the poorest of the poor. So I would say we know the scale, we know the scope, the nature, but now it is that action that ought to be taken. There is one area which is your law enforcement, where you have people who have to be prosecuted and in a fair process, where they are found to be guilty, consequences should take place. There is another section where we ought to say, what are the identified weaknesses in the public sector, in the institutions, such that laws which are put in place will never allow corruption on this industrial scale again.
Let's look at that, for example. Let's talk about the government, for example, saying administratively, procurement-wise, they are committing to reinforce that particular aspect for greater monitoring, greater accountability, and greater transparency. Much to our surprise, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the degree of stealing that took place when we were having a crisis in the country was unbelievable. And so we ask, did we conceptualize any new framework to reinforce the administration of government and the procurement processes?
It is only after those PPE scandals had emerged, it is only after the Zondo Commission report emerged, that we begin to grapple with the notion of major reforms which will overhaul the public sector. Professionalization of public service is one such intervention, and the framework for such was approved by the Cabinet after National School of Government, DPSA, or Department of Public Service and Administration, PSC, working with many other experts who were working on that particular project. That framework is looking at the entire ecosystem of people before they are recruited, the training, the recruitment process, the induction process, the in-service training, performance assessment, and the recruitment process with experts being brought in up to the exit of the system. That in itself, to me, is one of the major interventions which will begin to make sure that people are employed on the basis of competence and their professional attributes, rather than loyalty or belonging to any patronage network. And that will go a long way. The strengthening of law enforcement, the review of our training of programs to infuse more values and ethics in building a character of a person who is planning to be a public servant becomes very, very much important. So it's the whole ecosystem. Other interventions or policies have been introduced. The lifestyle audit is already in place, being rolled out across the country. And that in itself is but one of many tools that can be used to fight the scourge of corruption.
So good governance, people who are well equipped and capacitated, in fact, who qualify professionally to be in those positions. Transparency, as you put it, and integrity that is being brought in by auditing. The big other question, Prof, is the question of accountability. You know, when you took on this hat and you say, "Ooh, Prof, you are now going into public service," when you have been, of course, an academic doing analysis and looking at what the public servants were doing, we said one of the biggest challenges that Professor Fikeni would probably encounter is political will. Because it doesn't matter how much greater framework you want to introduce and how much professionalism you want to introduce, if there is no resolute political will from those who serve in public office and those who are in the higher leadership to turn things around, nothing will ever happen. And one of the ways we want to see political will is the ability to hold those who do wrong accountable.
That is correct, but at the same time, it is not the full picture. I would rather focus on the will of those who want to see change, making sure that these changes are introduced and implemented. Because at times, once you have these, and the public now is well aware of the damage of having weakened institutions because services are not delivered, and you do have all kinds of challenges that we are experiencing. And ultimately, you pay all kinds of levies because money is going everywhere except where it is most needed.
Yeah.
So those who are fighting for reforms should be resolute and make sure that they lobby, they fight for reforms to be in place. And in such situations, that's when political will give wings to such a struggle to change. And it is so important to have such changes such that even if you have political uncertainties which may be brought by coalitions and the fragility of those, which might be brought by some political contestations, if you have that professional public service, it is able to absorb those shocks and continue to do the work of the state. Yeah. Administrations will come and go, but public service ought to have that institutional memory, that technical expertise to support any administration as it comes. And that in itself, the professionalization framework, does address the issue of political administrative interface.
Yes.
So that you do not have unlawful instructions, You do not have anything negative in those interactions. You regulate it and make sure that professionalism is not compromised.
So you're saying, I'm sure you're not saying we let go of the others, your forensic investigations and other legal processes and the costly commissions, but you're saying over and above that, if, for example, we could lean a little bit more on the whole of society integrated approach, we would even save ourselves some money of these risky, costly commissions of inquiries and panels that will continue to be challenged in courts and so on and so forth. So then the next question would be, do we need to do a little bit more around the public awareness part of it, around what constitutes corruption?
Oh, certainly, without any doubt, exposition of what corruption, what fraud is very important. And I do think that the live broadcast of some of the testimonies around corruption, as well as the publication of reports, the media has played a crucial role at times in that same space. Whistleblowers has raised public consciousness. But now we ought to professionalize and institutionalize that engagement to say, what does it mean to have an ethical public service in which the values of service, in which integrity, transparency, accountability are at the core? That in itself is also a societal problem, because issues of morality, they will start at the home, in a family, in the education system. They will go to your university or tertiary institutions where training is taking place, up to your workplace. So that in itself, that's why I keep referring to that ecosystem that this framework of professionalization so well articulates. If we are able to do that, public awareness is embedded in that. But again, we appeal to the media, we appeal to the public to always shine light where there is darkness in a corner, where corruption is taking place. And it is for that reason that the conference that we have called in partnership with the UN, in partnership with the Chapter 9 institutions, with UNISA, has brought in people from the public service, people from the private sector, from the NGOs, to say, let's come together and share experiences and turn the tide.
What are some of the key activities that will be outlined in this particular program?
One of the most important things that we've done, quite an ambitious, program that we have, was to say we need to have the head of the executive, the president. We need to have Chief Justice. We need to have the Speaker of Parliament or leadership of Parliament. Those are the three branches of government, to give an account of how they are responding in concrete terms to the reports which have been there, one after the other, in terms of corruption. We are bringing in your Chapter 9 institutions like your AG, the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, CRL, and so forth, to say, again, those oversight institutions, what role are they planning to do? It's a way of focusing the minds to say, we've had all these reports now. What are concrete steps that we're taking forward? And more importantly, how are we coordinating those activities? That is the reason for this conference, but we're saying it should not end on an International Anti-Corruption Day. It should be an everyday thing. It should be a societal culture to deal with and fight corruption.
And as society, what do we need to do? I mean, how do we attach ourselves to this work, and how do we support this on the day itself, but also going forward?
Well, on the day, participating by following, the live broadcast in some instances, live streaming in different platforms of the participating institutions like the PSC, like UNISA, the government communication services will also have that in its own platforms, so that we're able to engage. Sometimes there will be the Mentimeter and the question and answer, the engagement of those participating on the online platforms. But more important, as different institutions are bringing their testimonies and their strategies on what they are planning to do, there are platforms in terms of what the public can do. Most of the time, these crimes take place in the communities. We do have the corruption hotline. We do have all anti-corruption mechanisms of reporting. That is your public consciousness and participation. For example, when people are stealing cable, you know that the whole community is going to suffer. And you probably know where they are keeping these cables. By coming forward to the law enforcement or reporting, that is one other way of assisting with the fight against corruption. It wouldn't be left just to the police alone. It has to be everybody putting their shoulder on the wagon.
Prof, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and highlighting very important day, this, the International Anti-Corruption Day, commemorated annually on the 9th of December. Of course, part of our commitment to the anti-corruption strategy and how we could play a part. Certainly some of those pillars being highlighted tonight by Professor Somadoda Fikeni.